Okay. Talk about today's title, Painful Things. So, okay. Let's study some Gemara today. We are going to move on. We spent a few weeks on Tractate Yevamos, where we spoke about children and marriage. Today, we're going to go in a different direction. And we're going to talk a little bit about, well, you'll see, it's about life, but we'll talk about Torah. And the reason is because next, in a little bit over a week, we are going to celebrate the giving of Torah, the holiday of Shavuos, which begins next Saturday night. We have all sorts of learning opportunities on Shavuos. We have all-night Torah study on Saturday night over here. Unfortunately, it's not going to be broadcast on Zoom or in any recording. But I do hope that those who can will join us for Torah study through the night. And then we read the 10 Commandments on Sunday. We have a dairy meal and ice cream. So there's a lot of exciting things to look forward to. But therefore, this week, and we'll see if we get in the class next week, we'll talk about the Gemaras will touch upon Torah. This Gemara is not only about Torah, but certainly touches upon the idea of Torah and Torah study. But I'm going to study Tractate Brachos, page 5a, Hey Amud Aleph. And those who are familiar with Talmud know that Brachos, the Tractate Brachos, I've heard that even though Brachos is a total of, I don't know how many pages, 60 pages or so, 60 daf, it is the longest tractate, even though there's a tractate with 160 daf, but because the pages of Talmud and Brachos are so big, they're filled with Talmudic text. And it's filled with all sorts of areas of Judaism. If you study the Tractate Brachos, it covers like everything, covers all areas of life. And we'll see that. So let's study a little bit of Talmud. Tractate Brachos 5a, 4 lines from the top of the page, if you are following with me in a Talmud. Omar Reb Levi bar Chama, Rabbi Levi, the son of Chama. Omar Reb Shimon ben Lakish said in the name of Reish Lakish. This is an interesting lesson over here. La'olam yargiz adam yetzer toiv al yetzer hara. Here's what he says. A person should have their good inclination be angry at your evil inclination. In other words, generally we say anger is a bad thing. Anger is losing one's temper. The Rambam Maimonides tells us that there is never a good time for anger, never, which is somewhat of a pretty remarkable statement. Most of us think that some things warrant anger, right? You have a terrorist attack. You have someone goes into a school and shoots up a bunch of school children. You should be angry, right? The Rambam says there is never a good time for anger. That's not the focus of today's discussion, but it's interesting. It says it's never a good time for anger. Despite that, the Gemara here is saying that there is a type of anger which is good, which is to anger, to have your evil inclination, your good inclination, angry at your evil inclination. Now, I think to appreciate this, that we have to realize that we actually have two sides within us. Could you really be, when you say you're angry at yourself, what does that mean? What does it mean when someone says, I am angry at myself? You are yourself. So how can you be angry at yourself? So what does it mean when the true meaning of angry at yourself, at least in its appropriate way, is that we believe, the Tanya explains this, and even though this may sound simple, it's actually a pretty radical idea. And that is that we have within us two souls. We have two operating systems. We have a divine soul and a animal soul. And that's different than what you often see in the comics, right? You look in the comics and you see a person who has to make a decision, and there's the good voice and that bad voice. So in the comics, whatever, you have the little angel with the halo on one side, and you have the demon with the pitchfork on the other side, and each one is trying to say, call your mother, and the other one says, no, don't call, be angry, be angry. So that's the two little, there's an angel and a demon kind of guide telling me what to do. That's not how Kabbalah understands it. We actually have two different souls. We have two personalities within us. We have a godly being. We are made up of a split personality. We are made up of a godly being, and we're made up of an animal being. And at any point in life, we are operating with one of the operating systems. We're either operating as a divine being. Divine means selfless, serving God, serving my purpose here in life, or I'm operating as an animal. An animal's not bad. It just means self-serving. So at any point in life, you're operating either as a godly being or an animal being. And both the godly being and animal being are part of who you are. So once you understand that you actually have two entities within you, you have two completely different entities within you. And by the way, could be the subject of a much longer discussion. The whole Tanya focuses on this. But once you realize you have two entities within you, so now it makes a little bit more sense when you say, I am angry at myself. What does it mean when I say I am angry at myself? What it means is that my godly entity, the part of me which is divine and good and selfless and holy, is angry at my animal entity. Because it knows there's an animal, selfish, self-serving, not necessarily evil, even self-serving. That's part of the animal. Animals are not evil. Animals are just self-serving. So the godly part of who I am is angry at the animal part of who I am. So therefore it says, and a person should, that's good. That type of anger is good. The anger in which your godly soul gets angry at your animal self, both of them are you, but your godly self gets angry at your animal self, that is a good anger. That's a productive anger. Okay, that's what you should do. He says, what about, so now if that works, let's say, in Nitzchah, what we're talking about is, suppose a person has a bad habit, an unhealthy habit, an unholy habit. So how do you get over it? So he says the first approach is to get angry. Get angry at your animal self. Say, how dare you? How dare you try to, I am, after all, a godly being. And how could you means me, the animal within me, how could you try to distract me from the godly entity that I really am? All right. That's what it means to be angry at oneself. Does this make sense? I mean, do we read through this?
It's not necessarily needs to be anger. It can be like when a person regrets. It doesn't come from anger.
I said, but regret is usually in the aftermath. Here we're saying I have a temptation right now, something that I probably shouldn't do. How do I stop myself from doing it? That's what the Gemara is talking about. How do I stop myself from doing something that I shouldn't do? I'm approaching a situation. It could be something. Could be gossip. All right, could be gossip, which is a conversation, which I know I shouldn't. Or it could be something immoral. It could be something unethical. There's all sorts of things that I could do that I shouldn't be doing. So how do I stop myself? What is the step to take to stop myself from doing something I shouldn't do? It's a simple question we've all faced many times a day. So what's the answer? So the Talmud here is giving a several pronged approach. The first step, it says, is try to get your godly side angry at your animal side and say, how dare you? How dare you suggest that I do such a thing? You can almost imagine a conversation between friends where one friend says to the other, let's go rob a bank. And the other one says, how can you say that? How can you suggest such a horrible thing? So instead of being two friends, it's two friends within me. Both friends are within me. So I'll get myself one side, the godly side, angry at my animal side, and hopefully that'll work. That'll stop me from doing something that I shouldn't do. That's approach number one. What if that doesn't work? What if the animal side says, come on, it'll be fun. It'll be great. So now what? So now what do we do? What's step number two? It says Vimlav. So here we get into a more mystical idea or a more spiritual process. The Imlav, Yasok Batorah. If the argument trying to reason with the animal within you doesn't work, so then study Torah. And it basically says that at any point you could say, all right, you want to do something wrong. There's a part of me which says do something wrong. Let's push it aside for a moment. We'll get to it later. In the meantime, let's study Torah. Let me open a holy book and preoccupy myself with something holy. So that's the second step. And that hopefully will distract you once you're on the path, once you're in the midst of doing something righteous, holy, studying of Torah, hopefully that'll distract you and push away the negative inclination altogether. What if that doesn't work? If that causes victory over one's Yetzer Hara, over one's evil inclination, over one's animalistic instincts, mutav, that's great. What if that doesn't work? What if what's that? Oh, so what if one's desire is still burning within them to do something which they know they should not do? So here we have the next step, which is Yikra Kriya Shema. One should recite the Kriya Shema, the Shema prayer. And obviously, what does that mean? The Shema prayer is more than just a simply mumbling of words. The Shema prayer is our affirmation of our faith. There's no prayer which emphasizes the Jewish belief system than the Shema. We start by saying belief in one God, and then the obligation to have love for that God and to carry it with you every year. To love God with all your heart, all your soul, all your being. So the recitation of the Shema is a reminder, is a prayerful reminder. So right now what we have is the 3 steps. First step is to try to kind of convince yourself out of doing something wrong. If that doesn't work, then one should try to study Torah, distract oneself with the study of Torah. And if that doesn't work, then you move on to prayer. Pray, and hopefully prayer is more of an emotional connection, and hopefully that will allow oneself to redirect oneself and avoid making bad decisions and make the right decision. The in lav, im nitzchai. So if that 3rd step works, great. In lav. But if that 3rd step does not work, yiskar lo yom hamisa. Then you should remind oneself of the day of death. What's the idea of reminding oneself of the day of death? What is the idea of reminding oneself? How does the reminding oneself, that is like the 4th step and the final step to resolve, to hopefully allow a person to make the right decisions. What is reminding of the day of death? So there's different explanations of what that means. One is a statement that our sages say. One of the great sages in the Mishnah told his students, you should do tshuva one day before you die. V'shuv yom echad lefnei misaska. Do tshuva one day before you die. So the students asked, that's great, but I have no idea when I'm going to die. He said, exactly. Exactly. So therefore, do tshuva today. In other words, often in life, we think, you know what, even if I mess up, I have plenty of time to fix it. I'll fix it some other time. So yeah, and Judaism believes in tshuva. Judaism believes in the ability to fix things up. But there is a who knows about life? Nobody knows. I mean, we all know how I mean, it doesn't mean we should live in fear of death, but the fact of the matter is that life, nobody knows what life will bring. So one approach is saying that don't push things off. Don't push off you have a grudge against someone. You say, okay, right now I'm angry. I'm not going to make amends, but there'll be time, plenty of time that to fix this relationship. I don't know. There may not be time to fix that relationship, whether it's you or someone, the other person. Whether, or certainly if you do things wrong. So remember, Yom HaMisa is that nobody knows how much time they have in life. I remember reading, I've shared this, there was a diary that was written by a local boy who tragically passed away at a young age. His name was Miles Levin. I don't know, maybe some of you know, his father is Yoni Levin, his local wonderful gentleman. Anyways, his son, Miles Levin, came down with cancer in his teenage years. And he started writing a diary during his illness. At one point, he wrote the following. He said, today, I went to a driving range. Went to the driving range, and there was a bucket. What happens in the driving range? You get a bucket full of golf balls. So he said, and when you put your hand in the bucket the first time, there's like a ton of golf balls there. So you don't really think twice. You put the golf ball onto the tee, and you hit, whatever, if it's a good hit or it's not a good hit, you don't care because there's an endless amount of golf balls. And you take one after the other, and each time you're hitting, some are good, some are not good. And then at some point you reach down and you realize, oh, the bucket is almost empty. So now when you take that golf ball and you put it onto the tee, you don't just recklessly swing the club. Now you want to pay attention. And you pay a little bit extra attention to make sure that it's a good hit. And then the next one, and then you see there's only 5, 4, 3, and now you really pay attention every time you put that ball on the tee. You want to make sure it's a good hit. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, so you have the final ball. And then he ends that article by saying, last week I found out that I only have 18 months to live. And the message he was saying is, it's like that bucket of golf balls. It's like, you think there's an endless amount of golf balls, so it doesn't really matter how well I hit the ball. But who knows? Maybe this is the last golf ball. Or the truth is, and the way I like to see that analogy, is that the first golf ball is as valuable as the last one. It's as valuable. Every day is as valuable as your last day. You have the same 24 hours in your first day of life as you have in your last day of life. So it's a reminder, sometimes the key to making the right decisions is to remember the 4th step. Step number 1 is try to talk yourself out of doing the wrong thing. Get angry with your animalistic side. Step number 2 is study Torah. Step number 3 is prayer. Step number 4 is Life is short. That's one understanding of Yaskul Yom HaMisa. Another idea behind Yom HaMisa, by remembering the day of death, is that Judaism believes in consequence. We believe that the death, as we know it, is not the end of everything. That's just the move on to the day of judgment. We believe in a world to come. We believe in heaven and hell. So therefore, when you remind yourself that you're going to have to, even if nobody sees, and even if what your action is doing doesn't seem to have any consequences, no, there are consequences. Every action has consequences. Your mitzvahs have consequences. Your sins have consequences. So that is the another explanation of remembering the day of death. But either way, these are the four steps that one could do or one should do when trying to overcome temptation, when trying to overcome making a bad choice. Okay. Next, again, we're going to see this happens to be this statement of the Talmud. This page of the Talmud is kind of random ideas coming together, so you may not see the connection between one thing and the other. We'll just move on in the page of the Talmud. Continuing on 5a of brachas. Again, if any questions or comments, please feel free, whether you're joining us live or virtually. Okay. The next statement has to do with Torah. Again, the reason I chose this Gemara is because in a week and a half, we're going to celebrate the giving of Torah. So here we have an important statement about how we are supposed to view all of Torah. V'amar Rab Levi bar Chama, Rab Levi, the son of Chama, said another thing. The previous statement was by Rab Levi bar Chama in the name of Reish Lakish. This too was said by Rab Levi bar Chama in the name of Reish Lakish. My dechsiv. What does it mean when the Torah states, this is in the book of Shemos, Exodus 24:12. God says, "Va'etna lacha es luchos ha'aven," I gave to you the tablets of stone, okay? Veha Torah, and the Torah I gave you, veha mitzvah, and the commandments, asher kasafti lehorosam, that I wrote to teach. It seems to be a superfluous wording. It could have just said, I gave you the Torah. We all know what Torah is. And yet God says, I gave you the luchos of stone, the Torah, the mitzvah, which I wrote for you to teach. Extra words, and the Torah doesn't include any extra words. So what is the meaning of the length of this verse? So he answers like this. Each part of that verse is God saying a part of Torah that I gave to you. That is, luchos, the fact that I gave you the luchos, that's the 10 commandments. God says the 10 commandments came from me. Torah, then God says, but in addition to the 10 commandments, also the entire 5 books of Moses came from me. The mitzvah, that's referring to the Mishnah. That's the oral Torah, it came from me. Asher kasafti, the words of the verse would say that which I wrote, that's referring to the books of the prophets and the ksuvim and the books of the writings, books like Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Psalms. They also came from me. Lehorosam, to teach, that's referring to Talmud, that's referring to the entire Talmud. What's the depth of that statement? Melamed says, Relevi is coming to tell you, Shekulam nitnu lemoshe misinai. The entire Torah. You walk into a library and you see a whole library full of books with ideas that were developed over the last 2,000 years. You may say, look, the 10 commandments, I believe, okay, that comes from God. Maybe even I'll accept that the entire 5 books of Moses comes from God. Maybe you want to add to that the prophets, the books from King David, Solomon. All right, maybe those are divinely inspired. But the Mishnah and the Talmud that were composed by sages who lived, 2,000 years ago, that was just their opinion. So he says, no, the Torah itself wants to tell us that no, all of Torah as it's handed down from the Mishnah through the Talmud, all of it is divine, all of it comes from God. Yes?
How come there is a midrash that says that Moshe was in a class of Rabbi Akiva?
Right.
And Rabbi Akiva say all kind of things that Moshe didn't understand. Then Moshe say, how you give the Torah by me, not by him. So basically, if he didn't understand what Rabbi Akiva say, meaning Hashem didn't give it to him on Mount Sinai.
So what is so basically the Gemara that says, just to explain what Matan's question is, that Moshe Rabbeinu, says Moshe Rabbeinu had a vision, and he had a vision of the future, and he saw the great Rabbi Akiva teaching a class, and in that vision he heard Rabbi Akiva teach something, and he said, I never heard of it. Moshe said to God, I never heard of this. I'm supposed to be the one who's giving the Torah, and this is brand new to me. This idea is news. So so God says, wait a second, listen to the shir. And then as the Torah class continues, one of the students asks Rabbi Akiva and says, where do you get this from? So Rabbi Akiva says, Halacha l'Moshe miSinai. This is a law that we derive from Moshe at Sinai. So Moshe a moment ago said, I have no idea what he's talking about. And then he says, this goes back to Moshe at Sinai. So how do we understand that whole statement? The idea is like this. It's not as if Moshe, when Moses gave us the Torah, he gave us all the information that would be expressed over the next 3,000, it's now 3,300 years. It's not as if Moshe Rabbeinu said all of that. But contained within the wisdom of Moshe that was passed on was, so to say, the DNA of all of the wisdom of the sages, which would continue until today. Now, there's a system that has to be followed. It doesn't mean that anybody who says anything, anybody who develops any Torah idea means that comes from God at Sinai. But if a person follows within the system of Torah, within the tradition as Torah has been taught, and there's a certain rules. It's like a game of chess. There's certain rules you have to follow. You can't just move the horse across the board. You have to go in a certain way. So when a person follows the system of how Torah can be studied and derived, then yes, and the person is holy and shows that holiness, then yes, that we believe that was inspired from Moses at Sinai and continues to inspire people even with issues that come up today. Today, there are questions which say there are Torah sages today. Torah sages today are handling issues which not only Moshe Rabbeinu didn't know of, are concepts that didn't exist then. Today we live in a world where what's that? Electricity or genetics. I mean, there's so many new questions which come up in which Judaism has a say in the matter, right? Judaism has a say in medical ethics, even though much of medical ethics are because of new situations that came up, which didn't exist 3,000 years ago. But nonetheless, so you can't say Moshe knew. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't know about what Judaism says about a DNR versus a DNR resuscitate versus a what's the opposite of DNR? What's the word? DNR means it's like I'm just bringing up a common medical question. When someone says, don't resuscitate this person, but if that a person goes into the hospital and they say, you get to sign on a paper, this person who is ill, do you resuscitate them if they lose consciousness or whatever? Do you bring them back to life? How strongly should we put effort into bringing them back to life? My point is, I don't want to get caught up in medical ethics. The point is, many of the questions which come up nowadays are based on the reality that exists now, which didn't exist 100 years ago, about 3,000 years ago. But the idea we believe is that the inspiration, the divinity that Moshe Rabbeinu, that Moses gave at Sinai, carries throughout all of history, and it all comes from Sinai. And that's what we're saying over here is the meaning of this verse, is that God says it's not just the 10 Commandments, it's not just the 5 books of Moses, it's not just the prophets, but all of Torah, when studied properly, and when studied properly, is inspired by the Torah as it was given from Moses at Sinai. And this is
Hey, Rabbi.
Yes.
What does the mitzvah correspond to in that pasuk?
The word mitzvah corresponds to Mishnah. Mishnah is the first book of oral law. The Talmud is the elaboration of the Mishnah. Yeah, so this is a big idea. I'm not saying this is a small idea. It's a pretty radical idea, but this is how we approach Judaism, is that we believe that the words of the sages are also divinely inspired. We believe that the words of the sages are also divinely inspired. And by the way, for those who may not be familiar, I don't know what percentage, but a huge percentage of Judaism as is practiced is not from the Torah. It's from the sages. We are sitting right now in a synagogue. Nowhere in the Torah do you come across the concept of a synagogue. You come across a temple. We're saying it's a synagogue is a rabbinic concept. We're wearing yarmulkes. A yarmulke, nowhere in the Torah does talk about a yarmulke. That's rabbinic. It's not even a rabbinic commandment. It's a custom. It's when you think of Jewish observance nowadays, a bar mitzvah, everyone knows, yeah, of course you have a bar mitzvah, right? Nowhere in the Torah does it say anything about a bar mitzvah. Nowhere does it say about a bat mitzvah. Nowhere does the Torah say about a chuppah. All the things you think of, sitting shiva. So many of these things which we consider, of course, this is Judaism, is the words of the sages. So if I determine that the words of the sages is not from God, then basically I've determined that most of Jewish practice today is not divine. So therefore, this message that says, no, that which the sages taught us is divine. It was inspired by the wisdom of Moses, who received it from God at Sinai. So now all the Judaism as we know it becomes godly and not just some sort of interesting ideas which were created by sages along the way. Fine. So that's why that little statement in the Talmud is a very important statement. And certainly there's more to talk about, but let's move on. Fine. Continuing on Hey Amud Aleph. And actually, I am going to jump, for those who may be following the actual text, I'm going to jump to the bottom of the page. Because this was the text that was sent out, and I see we're running a little bit late. The text that was sent out earlier today is connected to this Talmud. Tanya Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai Omer. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the great Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, many people celebrated his life last week at the Lag BaOmer, celebrated his anniversary of his passing. Here's what he said. He says, Shalosh matanos tovos nasan HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael. God gave the Jewish people 3 gifts. V'kulan loy nitnon ela al yedei yisurin. And these 3 gifts were only given through pain. There's 3 gifts, and they're given to us through pain. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with this Gemara, let me open this up to you. And what 3 gifts do you think are the gifts that God gave us, and they're given to us? They're given to us with pain, acquired through pain. Anyone want to take a guess? Yes. Life. Life is a gift that's given, and there's pain. Yes. Freedom is a gift that comes with pain. All right.
Is it teshuva?
Teshuva, repentance, comes through pain. I mean, these are all good answers. Nobody mentioned marriage. Yeah, go ahead. Yes. See, you're turning it around. It's not a gift that comes through pain. Pain itself is a gift. How so? Okay, that pain itself is a gift. Okay, and that Gemara is going to segue into that, even though it's not one of the 3, but the Gemara does segue into that concept. Okay, well, let's see what the Talmud answers.
Circumcision.
I'm sorry? Circumcision.
Circumcision.
Okay. That's yeah. This is the guy who said that when I got circumcised, it was so bad I couldn't walk for a year. All right, so this is what are the 3? What are the 3? Says the Gemara. And they are Eluhain. These are the 3. Torah. The Torah was a gift, and it's a gift that is acquired through pain. To properly receive the Torah, one has to go through some level of pain. Maybe pain could be a form of discomfort, really. Okay. The second is Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel. I think when you hear that, it certainly makes sense. The land of Israel is a gift, and it's a gift that unfortunately comes at the cost of pain. And the third one is Olam Haba, the world to come. Torah teaches that there is a world to come, and there is a reward, and the world to come is a gift, but there is a certain pain in order to acquire that. And then the Talmud says, what are the verses which support that? So we say, Torah minayin, how do I know that Torah comes through pain? So he quotes a verse which is from Tehillim, from Psalms, chapter 94, verse number 12. Ashrei hagever asher tiasrenuka. Praised is the person who has to go through pain. Praise the person who goes through pain. Umitorascha tilandenu. And from their Torah and from your Torah, they should learn. So you see the Tehillim links pain with Torah. Somehow to truly connect to Torah in its truest form, one has to put themselves through some level of discomfort. Pirkei Avos says that a person studies Torah. Their wording in the Pirkei Avos is Pas b'melach tochel, bread and salt you should eat. Umayim b'mesura tishta, and simple water you should drink. V'al ha'aretz tishon, and on the earth you should sleep. V'chayit sa'ar tichya, and really live form of pain. Uvatorah ta'amel, and then you can study Torah. Which means, does that mean what? I have to eat only bread and salt to eat Torah? I have to drink water and sleep on the floor to study Torah? So the idea is that there's different explanations of it. One explanation is that one's focus on when they study Torah, to study Torah properly, one should do so in such a way that at the time they have no other pursuits. They have no other pursuits. That right now, I don't care. I have no interest in delicious foods or sleep or a bed. Right now, I am so immersed in Torah, and I'm so interested in this study that nothing else matters to me. Whatever I need to eat, okay, give me some bread. I need to drink some water. I need a place to sleep. Whatever. There's a bed chair. I'll go to sleep. A person doesn't have to live a life of poverty to immerse themselves in something in a way that nothing else matters. You see this in other areas of life too. You could have an athlete, you could have a business person that they get so caught up in what they're doing that even though they may be worth many millions of dollars, but as they're focused and they're laser focused on what they're doing, then no wealth, no luxury matters at the moment. I don't care about anything else. All that matters to me right now is the study of Torah. And by the way, who's the one who says this? Rav Shimon Bar Yochai. Rav Shimon Bar Yochai personified this. For 13 years, he lived in a cave. It's his own story, but he lived in a cave and he survived on water and buxer, on that buxer, right? Carob. So that's all he was able to, so that is for 13 years. So he's not just talking the talk, he walked the walk. Because if you really want to acquire Torah in its truest sense, to be uplifted by it, it has to come with a commitment which may involve some level of discomfort.
So it means he said this sentence after he was in the cave?
I don't know. It's a good question. But whether he said it before or after, he lived up to it. Either he lived up to what he said previously or he was saying in hindsight. But I don't know. It doesn't say when he said this. Why? Why does it matter? Oh, okay. But he just gave us a pasuk. What is the source? Where is the Torah source for the idea that the land of Israel is a gift that comes with pain? So here we have a different verse. And that is in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 8, verse number 5. And here we have a very profound verse. If you can live with this mindset, it is a comforting mindset. It's not easy, but it's comforting if one could. That is, Ki ka'asher yeyaser ish es beno, just as a person has to rebuke and sometimes punish their son, Hashem Elokecha miyasrecha, sometimes God has to rebuke and punish you. A person has to see punishments in that such a light that sometimes. Now, so what does that mean? In other words, if I take my children to the playground and there are children misbehaving and my child is misbehaving, which child am I going to punish? The only one I'm going to punish is my own. In other words, the other kids, that's not my business, not my problem. There's certain connections, almost like a certain love that requires me to discipline my child. When a parent disciplines someone else's child, that's actually a very disturbing thing. The idea is you only discipline the child that's yours. And that way, the Torah is saying that when, just as a parent has to discipline and punish a child at times, God has to do the same to us. And therefore, when a person goes through pain, a person can think, maybe this is some form of discipline. Now, our sages teach us that this calculation should only be made about myself. I should never make this calculation about someone else. When I go through my own form of pain, so maybe it could be healthy for me to look inward and say, maybe this is a certain divine message of something in my life that I have to correct, that I have to do better. And this is God's way of rebuking me. But when someone else goes through pain, then I have no right to say, maybe this is the divine punishment. When it comes to someone else, all we have to, in that situation, we are told to be compassionate and caring and pray for them and do whatever we can to help them. So there's a essential difference between how we see our own pain and someone else's pain. Our own pain, it is a healthy approach to look inward and say, maybe there's a divine message here that there's an area in my life which I have to do better. Someone else's pain, that's not my calculation to make. And then one's approach should be only compassion. However, getting back to the Talmud says over here, that the verse where it says, Ki ka'asher yeyaser ish es beno Hashem Elokecha miyasrecha, just as a parent sometimes has to punish a child, so too God has to rebuke and sometimes punish us. The very next verse says, Ki Hashem Elokecha miviyach al eretz tova. that God will bring you to this good land. So the Talmud says, because those two verses are juxtaposed, they're right next to one another, the idea that there is the idea of divine rebuke and punishment right next to the verse which states, and I will bring you to the land. So therefore, from here you can see that the entry into the land of Israel is going to be connected to some level of pain. And finally, how do we know that the world to come is acquired as a great gift, but is acquired through pain? Because the verse states, and this is a verse in Mishlei, Proverbs chapter 6, verse 23, Ki ner mitzvah v'torah or, a mitzvah is a candle, and Torah is light. The derech chaim, but the way of life, tochachos musar, is going to include rebuke and is going to include challenging moments. So the path to the world to come does take some challenges and painful situations. Yes. So why the Yaakov is asking is, why do we say if ner mitzvah, if a mitzvah is like a candle and Torah is light, so how does that fit with the next statement, which is, but it's painful? It's seemingly light, and a candle that also emphasizes light should not be painful. So what, on a deeper level, if we're maybe to answer that question by posing another question, which is why? Why does it have to be this way? So basically we said that Torah comes with pain, and the land of Israel comes with pain, and the world to come comes with pain. Why? Why can't it just be given with goodness? Why is it necessary for there to be any pain? We hear the term no pain, no gain. So we find a similarity that in the, I guess, in common terminology, but does it really have to be that way? Does it really have to be that good things come through pain? So I was looking at some of the mefarshim on this. This Gemara that I'm using has a lot of commentary. So I'll share one or two of the ideas, or two which are really similar to each other, which maybe adds a little layer of explanation. Because again, why does it have to be that way? Why does it have to be the way? I think I was blocking the speaker. So I'll share from the Maharal, the great Maharal, Yehuda Lowy of Prague, and then the Benoyahu is another commentary who shares something similar. The Maharal says the reason why this truth exists is because there's a message here, and that is that the truth of these three gifts is that they are spiritual gifts and not material gifts. And this is something we may misunderstand. We may I know a bunch of people who tell me that there right now is a lot of birthright trips going out to Israel. And it's very easy when, I'm assuming many of us, most of us, maybe all of us over here have been to Israel. It's very easy to look at going to Israel as a luxurious material experience. I'm going there. There's shawarma on the street corners. There's beautiful beaches. Today there's high tech. It is a physically appealing place. It's enjoyable. And you see a lot of that, and it's marketed that way, understandably, because we're trying to get people to go to Israel, and we're trying to get materialistic people to go to Israel. So therefore, how do we advertise a trip to Israel? I know, because I've taken groups to Israel. You advertise with these beautiful pictures of there's a stunning land and there's beautiful hotels. So it's very easy to get caught up in that and say, I'm going there because it's just an enjoyable place to be. And the problem is that if you do that, you're actually missing out on the essence of what it is. And that is, it is a spiritual place. It is a godly place. There's many beautiful places in the world. There are places more beautiful than Israel. And so therefore, the idea of that it comes about when the Maharal says pain over here doesn't mean pain for the sake of pain. He says pain over here means a ability to separate from material indulgence. And that is that when we think of joy or pleasure, what do we typically think of? We think of pleasure, which our body enjoys. That's how the world understands pleasure. And that's a conflict to the essential nature of this gift, which is a spiritual gift. So as long as a person is in the mindset of pleasure and enjoyment, and how could I enjoy myself, then you're never going to be able to appreciate this gift, because this gift requires a separation from the material physical pursuits. Again, this doesn't mean that Judaism says that physical pleasure is not allowed and one should avoid eating and drinking. No, that's not what it's saying. But in some areas, to truly appreciate a spiritual gift, one has to remove oneself from their material pursuits. And really removing oneself from material pursuits is a form of pain, is a form of discomfort. Meaning, if I want to really connect to this, I got to forget the luxury. I've got to forget my bodily needs, take care of it, but not focus on it, and have a soulful approach. Soulful approach is uncomfortable for someone who's, and we're more naturally materialistic. That's what we naturally are. We're more naturally wake in the morning. How can I make myself happy? How can I indulge? How can I have pleasure? So to connect to a spiritual gift requires separation from material pursuits, and that is uncomfortable. And that's how the Maharal explains this idea. It's not that God says, oh, I want you to suffer in order to get something good. No, that's not the point over here. God doesn't want us to suffer. God says the key to appreciating and I think, by the way, not to say that I think this exists in other cultures as well. Cultures which have a more spiritual tendency say, you got to separate yourself. You got to separate yourself from the materialism if you want to tap into perhaps the greatest gifts of life. And those gifts are not material, they're spiritual. And those three things, that's how the Maharal explains that. All three. Torah too. A person can approach Torah and say, oh, you know what? I enjoy study. I enjoy intellectual debate. I enjoy it. And I go to school. So here could be another topic. Here's another topic. I enjoy mathematics. I enjoy history. I enjoy whatever other areas of political science. So let me dabble in another field of study. It says, no, it's different. Torah is a spiritual wisdom. You want to really tap into the spiritual wisdom of Torah, you got to remove yourself from the material pursuits of life. And then you can't be focused on both. You can't have both a pursuit of materialism and a pursuit of spiritualism at the same time. You can't. And that's how he explains. The same is true with the world to come. The world to come, we talk about is a reward for the soul, is a spiritual reward. But it is a greater reward. It is a greater gift than the material gift we have. And I think we sort of know that even in our life itself. When we think about the greatest gifts in life, it's usually not a material item. It's usually a relationship, a connection, something spiritual. When we think of what is most valuable to me, when I stop and think, even though what am I pursuing all day? I'm pursuing wealth or pursuing, I'm taking care of my body in some form or another. But when I stop and ask myself, what are the most important things in life to me? It's probably not going to be a sandwich. I mean, it's probably not going to be something of material value, even though I enjoy the materialism. Don't get me wrong. It's going to be something spiritual because we inherently understand that that's the deepest, the most profound gifts we have. And therefore we can go, that's how the Maharal explains this Talmud. God is not looking to give us pain. God is saying sometimes the way to appreciate the greatest spiritual gifts in life is to remove yourself, at least momentarily, for a period of time, from the pursuit of the material pleasures of life. And that's just uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable. But that's the key to then having the approach to spirituality. All right, stop here. And we'll dive in, we'll do a Ma'ariv, and then join us downstairs for some chalent and refreshments. Thank you everyone for joining. Look at that, it's after Shkia, so we can't. Yeah.
Yeshkoach.
See
Good
ya.
Shabbos.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're welcome. Be well.